Picture this. It's January 1606, and you are packed into a cold London crowd at the foot of a scaffold. Above you stands a man who barely looks alive. His legs are ruined. Weeks of torture have crushed them into useless pulp, so the executioner has to haul him up the ladder like a sack. The crowd is not here for justice. They are here for a performance. They want to watch him opened while he still breathes. This is the true story behind the name Guy Fawkes, and it is uglier than the masks and bonfires. Watch closely as the rope is set. The man's hands shake, not from fear, but from pain and exhaustion. The noose tightens. The executioner prepares the push. Then the broken man does something the state did not plan for. He does not wait. He summons one last burst of strength, leans forward, and throws his own weight off the ladder. For one instant, there is silence, then a hard snap that cuts through the winter air. That sound is not just death. It's defiance. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden mechanics of history, the parts that textbooks often hit like, subscribe and tell me in the comments, is history shaped more by strong leaders or by desperate rebels who gamble everything? Because what you just heard was a rebel cheating the system at the last possible second. And to understand why that leap matters, you have to understand what the king had prepared for him. Because this was never meant to be a simple hanging. It was meant to be an assembly line of agony, and Guy Fawkes refused to play his role. You can smell wet wool and cheap ale on the breath of the crowd. Men jostle for position, as if this were a fair. Women lift children so they can see. The state taught people to treat punishment as entertainment, because entertainment makes obedience contagious. The scaffold is built high so nobody can pretend they missed the lesson. Above, the condemned man's face is swollen and gray. His signature, if he even has strength to sign, will look like a child's scribble. Yet the king's officials still call him a traitor, as if that single word explains everything. In a moment, you will learn how the crown manufactures loyalty, not by argument, but by fear. And notice the detail that matters. His leap is not an emotional gesture. It is a calculation. He has one move left. He uses it. That choice will echo backward through everything that led to this rope and forward into everything England will do to prevent the next plot. Outside the scaffold, vendors sold hot drink to warm hands that came for cruelty. Somewhere a church bell rang, sounding peaceful, while men prepared violence. The official sentence was hanging, drawing, and quartering. 4 words that sound formal until you know what they mean in practice. The hangman's job was not to kill quickly. It was to bring you to the edge, let you slip into darkness, then pull you back. They would hang the victim just until he passed out, then cut him down and wake him with water. Only then did the real work begin. A knife would open the abdomen. The intestines would be dragged out and burned while the victim watched the steam rise. The heart would be torn out. The body would be hacked into pieces for display warnings nailed to gates and bridges like official posters. Guy Fawkes watched 3 of his friends die that way before his own turn came. He saw the script. And here's the detail people miss. Fawkes was a soldier, not a saint. Even with his joints dislocated and muscles torn from the rack, his mind was still calculating. The state wanted a show, a slow lesson, a crowd-pleasing scream. He gave them a corpse. When he jumped, the drop broke his neck, and the crowd groaned in disappointed hunger. The executioner raged because the essential ingredient pain was gone. They still cut his dead body into 4 pieces because the ritual mattered. But the king's theater had lost its climax, so ask yourself what kind of man chooses a broken neck leap over a chance, however small, to survive a few more minutes. What kind of mind makes a final tactical move while already ruined? To answer that, we have to stop treating Guy Fawkes like the director of this story. He was the hands, the specialist, the man who carried the powder. The true fuse was lit by someone else, a charismatic, dangerous architect history half forgot. And that architect was Robert Catesby. The crowd's disappointment is a clue. They didn't come to watch justice. They came to watch suffering. Public cruelty was a tool of government, a warning painted in blood. If the warning looked too gentle, the warning failed. That's why the ritual continues even after death. Quartering is not only punishment, it is messaging. Heads and limbs on gates tell travelers, the state owns your body. It is a language everyone understands without needing to read. Keep that in your mind, because it explains the conspirators' thinking. When a government uses terror as policy, rebels start believing terror is the only reply. The Gunpowder Plot is not born from a single villain's laugh. It is born from years of pressure, humiliation, and the feeling of being cornered. And now we step away from the scaffold and into the rooms where anger turns into planning rooms, where one persuasive man begins gathering people like dry wood for a fire. A raven circled above the roofs, drawn to the promise of flesh and noise. History has a strange habit of remembering the actor and forgetting the director. Every November, people burn an effigy of Guy Fawkes, as if the plot lived and died with the man in the cellar. But if you walked into a London tavern on a rainy night in 1604, you would not have seen Fawkes holding court. You would have seen Robert Catesby. Catesby was everything a nervous government fears wealthy enough to fund trouble, educated enough to plan it, and charming enough to recruit it. Contemporary accounts describe a man who could persuade you to walk into a fire and thank him for the warmth. He was tall for his era, confident, and skilled with a sword, but his most dangerous weapon was grievance sharpened into purpose. To understand that purpose, you have to understand that Catholicism in England was not just unpopular, it was criminal. The state treated Catholic worship as disloyalty. Priests lived like hunted animals. Ordinary families hid their faith behind locked doors and whispered prayers. And over all of it hung a tool designed to grind believers into poverty recusancy fines. If you refused to attend the Church of England's Protestant services, you paid. And you paid again. It wasn't a one-time penalty. It was a monthly drain, a slow bleed that turned faith into a financial wound. So when people ask why men would risk everything on an explosion, start here with a government that made conscience expensive, and with a man whose inheritance came packaged with debt, humiliation, and rage. Because Catesby wasn't looking for protest. He was looking for a reset button. And in early 1604, he decided the only way to change the system was to destroy it in a single stroke. The next step was recruiting someone he could trust with a plan so extreme that even fellow conspirators flinched when they first heard it. Catesby also had something else connections. He moved in circles where names opened doors, where a whispered recommendation could buy access, and where a private conversation could redirect a fortune. In other words, he was dangerous in the way only insiders can be dangerous. He didn't need to shout about oppression. He could point to it, a sheriff's list, a seized estate, a priest hunted like a fox, a family forced to choose between faith and food. He turned those facts into fuel, and he offered men a simple story: the government will never stop unless it is forced. If you want the plot to feel real, imagine it as recruitment, not mythology. A man visits a cousin. A friend invites a friend. A promise is made in low light. Each step feels small. Each step is a commitment, and once commitments stack, the path back to safety disappears. So when you hear Gunpowder Plot, don't picture fireworks first. Picture a charismatic organizer building a private army out of wounded pride. On the river, barges drifted as if politics could not touch water. Under the reign of King James I, being Catholic was a slow, bureaucratic kind of violence. The state didn't always need soldiers at your door. It had paperwork, courts, and money. Recusancy fines were the blade. Refuse the official church, and the penalty could reach £20 a month, a number that sounds small until you realize it was ruinous, especially when it never stopped. For years, Catesby's father paid those fines, bleeding the family fortune to keep their conscience intact. When Robert inherited the estate, he inherited the debt and the anger that had been compounding like interest. But money alone wasn't what broke him. Hope was. When Queen Elizabeth died in 1603, Catholics across England held their breath. James was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, a Catholic martyr in the popular imagination. Rumors spread that the new king would ease the pressure, relax the fines, allow priests to live openly. Catesby believed it. Thousands believed it. For a brief moment, they let themselves imagine a future without hiding. Then James shut the door. He offered polite words he would not persecute those who were quiet and outwardly obedient, but he tightened enforcement when he needed revenue. Fines were collected more aggressively to fill a hungry treasury. Priests were banished under threat of death. The machine didn't slow down. It became more professional. To Catesby, this wasn't politics. It was betrayal. The new king was not a savior. He was a parasite, feeding on the last scraps of an old family's wealth. Most men would have fled to France or Spain. Catesby's mind burned differently. He decided reform was a fool's game because the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. So he began to plan, not a protest, but a decapitation, one blow that would cut off the head of government and leave the body stumbling. And to do that, he needed allies who wouldn't run when the plan turned truly monstrous. James's hypocrisy mattered because it felt personal. He spoke like a moderate and governed like a collector. To Catholics who had hoped for relief, that gap between words and action felt like being tricked into dropping your guard. The fines weren't merely financial. They were social. You became a target. Neighbors learned they could profit by reporting you. Officials learned they could advance careers by squeezing you harder. The law turned community into surveillance. Catesby lived inside that pressure. Every month, another payment. Every year, more restrictions. Every rumor of tolerance followed by another crackdown. Eventually, patience stops feeling like virtue and starts feeling like surrender. This is the moment where the story shifts from grievance to decision. Not everyone who suffers becomes a conspirator. But some men interpret suffering as a message: if the state will not let you live quietly, then quiet living is no longer an option. And that belief becomes the doorway to violence. A courtroom clerk sharpened a quill, ready to turn blood into paperwork. In early 1604, Catesby called in a man he trusted, his cousin Thomas Wintour, and invited him to lodgings in Lambeth. The room was likely dim, curtains drawn, not because he was being dramatic, but because secrets were survival. Catesby did not rant. He did not shout. He spoke with the calm of a man who had already accepted his own death. He proposed a plan so audacious that Wintour recoiled. They would not simply kill the king. Assassinations happened. Kings were replaced. The state adapted. Catesby wanted something absolute to destroy the entire English government in a single moment. King, lords, bishops, commons, all gathered for the state opening of Parliament, all in one room, all under one roof. In that place, Catesby argued, the government had done all the mischief, so that place would become their punishment. He didn't talk like a politician. He talked like a man declaring a sentence. But Catesby had a practical problem. He was a strategist, a recruiter, an organizer. He was not a professional soldier. He did not know the exact mathematics of blowing stone into dust. He did not know how much powder was needed to break heavy medieval foundations. He did not know how to store it, move it, conceal it, and ignite it at the right moment without killing himself early. He needed a specialist, a man who had spent years in the mud and blood of European war, someone trained in siegecraft and explosives, someone who could turn a vision into a functioning mechanism. And that is where the story of Guy Fawkes truly begins, not as the mastermind, but as the demolition expert. Because when Wintour went searching for that expert, he didn't find a cackling villain. He found a professional cool, disciplined, and terrifyingly competent. Wintour's first reaction horror is important. It shows this wasn't a casual tavern fantasy. It was an extreme plan that even committed men had to digest. Catesby's gift was that he could make the extreme sound like the only logical step left. He also framed it as divine judgment, because religion was the language of legitimacy. If God had designed that place for punishment, then the act stopped being murder in his mind and became correction. That is how violent plans make room in the conscience. But conscience doesn't move barrels. Skills do. That is why the search for a demolition expert is the story's turning gear. Without a man who understands powder and stone, the plot is just talk. So the moment Guido agrees to return to England, the plot becomes real. It gains hands. It gains discipline. And it gains a quiet professional who can keep secrets without needing to be admired. From here on, every practical detail matters. Keys, leases, disguises, storage, damp air, watchmen, and timing. The plan will live or die on boring things. And boring things are exactly what most people forget. A patrolman yawned at his post. Unaware, he guarded a nation's heartbeat. We tend to picture Guy Fawkes as a cartoon, an evil grin behind a mask. Chaos for its own sake. That picture is comforting because it makes the plot feel unreal. The real man was more dangerous than the myth because he was ordinary in the way professionals are ordinary steady, capable, and hard to shake. Born in York in 1570, Fawkes did not begin life as a rebel. His father worked within the church courts and was a Protestant. But after his father died, his mother remarried a committed Catholic recusant, and young Guy was introduced to England's underground faith. He saw hidden masses. He saw families paying fines like ransom. He saw the state treating prayer as disloyalty. Something in him hardened. At 21, he did what many angry young men did. In that era, he left. He sold his small inheritance and crossed the Channel, not to serve England, but to fight for Catholic Spain in the Spanish Netherlands. For 10 years he lived in the grinding, filthy reality of the 80 Years' War. This wasn't glorious cavalry charges. It was siege warfare, earthworks, trenches, starvation, disease, and engineering. And engineering is the key. In Flanders, Fawkes learned the craft of sapping, digging tunnels under fortifications, packing powder into tight spaces, calculating how stone would fail. He learned black powder's temper, how damp air could ruin it, how it could separate over time, how much was needed to shatter a wall rather than merely scorch it. He learned patience, because siege work is slow death measured in inches. He became so immersed in this new identity that he stopped calling himself Guy and adopted the Italianized Guido. He was, in effect, a man without a country, an exile with skills. England did not want to imagine sitting beneath Parliament. When Wintour found him, he did not need to sell him a dream. He only needed to offer a mission. And Guido did not hesitate. Because some men don't look for safety. They look for purpose. And purpose can be as explosive as powder. In Var, engineers are often deadlier than fighters. A swordsman kills a man at a time. An engineer changes what a fortress means. Guido's decade in Flanders gave him the patience to work in mud, the nerves to handle unstable powder, and the habit of thinking in measurements rather than emotions. He also learned something else, that governments are vulnerable where they look strongest. A stone wall feels permanent until a tunnel makes it hollow. A confident garrison feels safe until the ground beneath it collapses. That mindset transfers easily from a fortress in Europe to a parliament in London. When Guido returns, he returns with that mindset. He is not dreaming. He is assessing. He is already imagining how stone will crack, how beams will fail, and how fire will race through air pockets. That is why calling him a madman is wrong. Madness is sloppy. Guido is methodical. And methodical men are the ones who almost succeed. A child asked a question and was hushed, as if curiosity itself were dangerous. Wintour did not reveal the full plan immediately. He told Guido only that English Catholics needed a man with siege skills to do something for the cause. It was a test. Guido passed without blinking. He did not ask for a retirement plan. he did not bargain. He packed his kit and returned to England with the calm of a soldier walking back into danger. London in 1604 was a city of whispers and watchful eyes. Plots were expected. Informers were everywhere. Yet in a house behind St. Clement's Inn, in a room locked against the world, Wintour introduced Guido to Catesby. And Catesby finally laid out the mechanics. He did not need a swordsman. He needed a mining engineer. The first version of the plan was not a cellar packed with barrels. It was a tunnel. They would rent a house near Parliament and dig under the foundations of the House of Lords. They would carve through thick medieval stone in secret, then place enough powder beneath the chamber to turn the opening of Parliament into a crater. It was backbreaking, slow, and insanely risky. Every strike of a pick could be heard. Every cart of rubble had to be disposed of. Every delay increased the odds of betrayal or discovery. Most of the conspirators were gentlemen, not laborers. Soft hands, expensive clothes, little experience with mud and blisters. Guido looked at the plan, looked at the men, and agreed anyway. From that moment on, he stopped being a person and became a function. He took the alias John Johnson, posing as a servant to Thomas Percy, a key conspirator with access and connections. Guido's job was to manage the most dangerous parts: the labor, the concealment, the powder, the fuse, the timing. But even Guido couldn't control everything. London stone was older and thicker than they expected, and the physical world does not care about ideology. The plot was about to crash into a simple problem: the physics of destruction. And that problem would nearly break them before they ever reached Parliament. The alias matters because the plot depends on invisibility, not heroism. John Johnson is ordinary by design, the kind of name you forget the moment you hear it. A servant can carry bundles, open doors, and move through spaces without being questioned too closely. That is how empires get hurt, not by obvious enemies, but by ordinary figures in the right place. Percy's role matters too. Gentlemen could access leases, permissions, and paperwork. A conspirator with court connections could rent space near Parliament without raising alarms. The plan is a blend of class privilege and underground rage, an alliance of men who know how power works and men who are tired of being crushed by it. As the tunnel plan takes shape, the group discovers something Grimstone does not care about: ideology. 9-foot foundations are simply 9-foot foundations. You can hate the government with all your heart and still fail against medieval masonry. That is why the next months become a test of stamina. If the men cannot endure the slow labor, the plot dies in the dirt. And if they do endure, London may wake up to a sunrise it never expected. A man in the crowd laughed too loudly, trying to hide how afraid he felt. For months, the conspirators tried to dig. They rented property close enough to Parliament to make the tunnel possible, then worked in secrecy, clawing at foundations that felt more like a fortress than a building. The walls were thick, 9 feet in places, and the labor was brutal. Water seeped in. Air grew foul. Hands blistered, then split. Men who had lived as gentlemen learned what it meant to swing a pick in silence and still leave no trace. Morale crumbled in the dark. Every day brought the same fear: one wrong sound above them, one curious neighbor, one suspicious guard, and the whole scheme would collapse into arrests. And the punishment for treason was not quick. Everyone involved understood the scaffold waiting at the end. Guido, the professional, kept them going. He knew siege work. He knew slow progress. He knew that tunnels were not built by courage but by stubborn routine. But even he could not change the stone's thickness or the mud's hunger. Then came luck pure, almost ridiculous luck. They heard a noise above their heads scraping, moving, a sound that did not belong to their tunnel. Guido went to investigate, careful as a scout. What he found changed everything. The sound came from an undercroft, a ground-floor storage cellar directly beneath the House of Lords. The current tenant was moving out. In an instant, the tunnel became unnecessary. The risk of digging vanished, replaced by a new opportunity. If they could legally control that cellar, they could store powder beneath Parliament without breaking a single stone. Thomas Percy used his status and connections to lease it. Think about what that means. They didn't need to tunnel under government. They had rented the perfect bomb casing and official space beneath the chamber where the entire regime would gather. The plot had just become simpler and far deadlier. Now all that remained was the powder, the timing, and the one man trusted to light the fuse. And somewhere in the shadows, the clock toward November began to tick louder. The tunnel work also forced them into intimacy. Dirt under fingernails, shared exhaustion, shared fear. In that cramped space, men revealed their limits. Some grew quieter. Some grew reckless. Some began to realize that once you start digging, you are also digging your own grave if you fail. Every cartload of rubble was a problem. Where do you dump stone in a city without attracting questions? Every smear of mud on a gentleman's coat could be suspicious. The conspirators had to perform normal life above ground while doing treason below it. And through it all, the government's paranoia was always present in the background. James's court had spies. Letters were intercepted. Informers were paid. The state assumed plots existed because plots did exist. The only uncertainty was where the next one would surface. So the dig was not just slow. It was loud in a way that mattered. It increased the time window for betrayal. The longer a secret lasts, the more chances it has to escape. Then fate hands them the undercroft, a legal space beneath Parliament, a doorway under the heart of the state. It feels like providence to men who want to believe. But providence can also be bait, because once you have the perfect location, you still have to survive the simplest danger of all being noticed. A noble adjusted his gloves, pretending he was not fascinated by suffering. By the time the cellar was secured, the conspiracy had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. A tunnel is slow and uncertain. A leased undercroft is stable. It turns a desperate scheme into an actual mechanism. With that space, Catesby's vision stopped being talk and started becoming an object. You could touch stone above, gunpowder below, and a single match between them. The next challenge was scale. Black powder was not a toy. Stored badly, it could spoil. Stored recklessly, it could kill the handlers before it killed the target. Transporting large quantities through London required lies, paperwork, and the kind of calm that only professionals possess. Guido had that calm. Catesby, meanwhile, kept recruiting. Every new man meant more manpower and more money, but also more risk. Secrets don't grow safer when shared. They grow heavier. A plot like this is not defeated only by guards. It is defeated by gossip, fear, and conscience cracking at the wrong time. And yet the men pressed on, driven by a belief that Parliament was not simply a building, but a machine designed to crush their faith. If the machine could not be repaired, they would shatter it. Here is a question for you. At what point does desperation stop being politics and become war? Because that is what they were preparing. War. Launched not by an army in the field, but by chemistry in a cellar. By the end of the summer, barrels were being gathered and hidden. Covers were prepared firewood, coal, anything that could disguise the shape of death. Guido John Johnson became the shadow caretaker of the undercroft, the man who belonged there just enough to avoid questions. But the more real the plan became, the more fragile it grew. A single inspection could reveal everything. A single honest worker could notice what shouldn't be there. A single letter, sent at the wrong moment, could detonate the plot without powder ever igniting. And that is the cruel irony. The closer the conspirators got to success, the closer they moved to disaster. Because in a city full of spies, even silence can be loud. Next, the barrels go in, the dates lock into place, and the government's paranoia wakes up. And once paranoia wakes up, it never sleeps again. The undercroft's mundanity was the disguise. Workers moved in and out of storage spaces every day. Coal and firewood were common. A servant tending supplies was common. If you wanted to hide something terrible, you hid it inside something ordinary. Yet the plot's success now depended on calendar and ceremony. Parliament had to meet. The king had to attend. Weather, illness, politics, all of it could shift schedules. The conspirators were betting their lives on a date they did not control. They also had to keep the powder usable. Black powder hates damp. London winters are wet. Cellars sweat. A single leak could ruin months of work. Guido's job became half chemistry, half theater. Keep the barrels dry. Keep the cover story believable. Keep the nervous men from doing something stupid. And while they worked, England kept living above them. Vendors shouted in markets. Bells rang. Sermons warned about treason. No one imagined how close disaster sat under their feet. Here's the cliff edge. The more perfect the trap becomes, the more it demands patience, and patience is where conspiracies rot. Someone always talks. Someone always writes a letter. Someone always hesitates at the wrong time. Next, we move from building the mechanism to the moment the state begins to sense it. Because in London, secrets don't just leak, they bleed. A priest glanced away, then looked back, trapped between pity and doctrine. The cellar under the House of Lords was not grand. It was practical, a low space, meant for storage, dark and forgotten, the kind of place London workers passed without thinking. That was its power. Parliament sat above it like a heart above a rib cage, never imagining what could be packed beneath. Once, Percy held the lease. the conspirators began the quiet work of loading death. Gunpowder had to be purchased, transported, and concealed without attracting attention. Barrels were brought in gradually, disguised as ordinary goods. Firewood and coal were stacked as camouflage. In a city that ran on shipments and storage, the conspirators tried to hide their crime inside normal routine. Guido, now John Johnson, became the caretaker of this trap. He understood powder. He watched for damp. He watched for leaks. He watched for curious eyes. His job was to keep the chemistry stable and the story believable. He was only a servant doing his master's errands. And while the barrels piled up, Catesby's circle tightened. Recruitment continued, because money and influence mattered. Yet every new man was also a new throat that could whisper. Every whispered detail created a new chance for the government to sense danger. That is the paradox of conspiracies. Secrecy keeps you alive, but secrecy is hardest when your plan grows larger than your own hands. The more powder you need, the more people you need. The more people you need, the less secret the secret becomes. Somewhere between the first barrel and the last, the plot stops feeling like an idea and starts feeling like a countdown. In the streets above, London life continues bells, markets, sermons, while beneath the Lord's chamber, a demolition charge takes shape. Above, the state prepares ceremonies. Below, rebels prepare ruin. Here's a question to sit with. If you believed your faith was being slowly crushed by law and fine, would you call this treason or war? Because that is how Catesby framed it to himself. And men can do almost anything when they believe they are already condemned. Next comes the final preparation, the date of Parliament, the length of fuse, the moment of ignition, and the escape. The trap is built. Now it must be sprung before suspicion arrives first. By late 1604 and into 1605, the conspiracy lived in two worlds, the bright official world of Parliament and ceremony, and the dark practical world of barrels, fuses, and hiding places. Those worlds were separated by a few feet of stone. The conspirators kept stacking cover, more firewood, more coal, more excuses. They learned the schedules of guards and the habits of workers. They rehearsed lies the way soldiers rehearse drills. Guido practiced being forgettable. Catesby practiced being confident. But confidence doesn't stop fear from creeping in at night. Men began to imagine what would happen if they were caught, not just death, but the Schofields ritual, the same ritual you saw in 1606. Hanging until near unconsciousness, cutting down, waking up, the knife, the fire, the crowd. That knowledge hardened some men and cracked others. And cracked men are dangerous to a secret. The state, meanwhile, had reasons to be anxious. Religious tensions were sharp. Foreign wars and rumors of invasion fed paranoia. King James believed in plots because his predecessors had survived them. He paid people to listen. He rewarded suspicion. So the plot moved forward under two clocks, the conspirators' countdown to the opening of Parliament, and the government's slow tightening net of surveillance. One of those clocks would strike first. And when it did, it wouldn't be fireworks that revealed the truth. It would be a small human act, an anxious warning, a careless word, a letter sent to the wrong person. That is how giant conspiracies die, not in the blast, but in the whisper before the blast. And that whisper is coming. Even the horses in nearby streets stamped, nervous at the smell of people. Over the next months, the conspiracy turns from talk into freight. Under cover of darkness, carts and boats move the same dangerous cargo again and again. 36 barrels of gunpowder. They cross the Thames, slip through narrow streets, and disappear into the undercroft beneath the House of Lords. To anyone above, it is just winter stock firewood, coal, supplies for a gentleman. To the men below, it is a sleeping volcano. Pause here and look inside those barrels, because gunpowder in 1605 is not a clean, modern explosive. Black powder is a temperamental mixture of 3 ingredients: saltpeter for oxygen, charcoal for fuel, and sulfur to help it ignite. It arrives as serpentine powder loose dust that likes to separate. The heavier sulfur can sink. The charcoal can rise. And if the mixture separates far enough, the barrel becomes expensive dirt. That means Guy Fawkes, still John Johnson in the cellar, cannot simply stack barrels and wait. He has to babysit the chemistry. He turns the barrels. He checks seals. He tests the damp air. He listens for leaks. London cellars sweat. Stone breathes cold. Moisture creeps into everything. A single ruined batch could turn the whole plan into a humiliating failure. Now assume the powder stays dry. Assume the mixture stays perfect. What happens on the morning of the state opening? Fawkes has stockpiled roughly 500 kilograms of powder. Black powder is weaker than modern high explosives, but volume is a weapon. In crude modern terms, you're looking at a blast on the order of more than a ton of TNT. And the undercroft is not an open field. It is a confined stone box. If Fawkes lights a slow match, about 15 minutes, and escapes, ignition becomes pressure. The thick walls act like the barrel of a giant cannon, forcing the path of least resistance straight up. In milliseconds, the floor above disintegrates. Men in robes and crowns do not have time to understand. Heat arrives first, then the shock wave. Stone and timber become weapons. Blocks tear outward at terrifying speed. Glass shatters. Nearby buildings take the punch. The center of government becomes a crater. This is not an assassination. It is decapitation, king. Lords, bishops, and the political class erased in one heartbeat. And the most chilling detail is the human one. Fawkes sits with this for days. He sleeps near it. He checks a rare watch. He counts hours like a clerk counting coins. While he calculates fuse time in darkness, another calculation is happening in light. The state has an eye, and it is beginning to blink open. Hold that thought as the city keeps breathing. Across the city, power is consolidating at Whitehall Palace under a man built for secrets, not tournaments. If Catesby is the heart of the rebellion and Fawkes is the hand, then Robert Cecil is the all-seeing eye of the state. Cecil is remembered as the first Earl of Salisbury. His enemies called him the Hunchback. He is physically small and visibly bent, born with a curved spine in a court obsessed with height, beauty, and martial display. Even King James jokes about him, calling him his little beagle with that cruel affection Rulers reserve for useful servants. But underestimated men are often the most dangerous. While courtiers hunt stags, Cecil hunts whispers. As Secretary of State, he inherits not only office, but a paranoid genius shaped by his father's politics. By 1605, he has built something England has never seen, a surveillance web dense enough to feel like air. It is not a formal agency with uniforms. It is a marketplace of information. Merchants, dock workers, innkeepers, messengers, priests who resent other priests, and double agents paid to listen. Letters are opened in transit and resealed with wax so perfect the recipient never suspects a breach. Names are written down at ports Dover. Plymouth especially, names tied to Catholic priests slipping into the country. Agents sit inside religious networks and report back in coded notes. Here is where the story becomes controversial. Did Cecil know about the Gunpowder Plot in advance? For centuries, historians have argued over the trap theory, the idea that Cecil sensed a conspiracy and let it grow because he needed a monster. Think about the politics. A small arrest does not end a faith, but a near-apocalyptic attempt to vaporize king and parliament could poison public sympathy for generations. If Cecil wanted harsh laws, he needed an excuse so disgusting that ordinary people would beg for repression. Supporters of the theory point to anomalies. How do conspirators lease a cellar directly under the House of Lords, inside a guarded palace, without alarm? How do they move 36 barrels of powder through London when gunpowder is tightly controlled? How do known agitators buy and transport military-grade material without a clerk noticing? Maybe Cecil saw more than he admitted. Maybe he had a mole near Catesby's circle. Maybe he watched barrels roll by and waited for the final moment to strike, so the king would be saved on the edge of disaster, and Cecil would look like the savior of the realm. Or maybe he knew only fragments and guessed correctly where to look. Either way, the net is tightening, and the conspirators make the oldest mistake persecuted men make. They believe their circle is unbreakable. It isn't. In a world ruled by fear, loyalty is often the first casualty. Keep your eyes on the ordinary details. Now come back to the cellar for a moment, because the most frightening part of the plot is how ordinary the work must look from the outside. Barrels do not arrive with trumpets. They arrive as errands, one load at a time. One quiet crossing of the river. One cart that looks like coal. One servant who looks like a servant. That is why historians obsess over the question of notice. London is not a sleepy village. Westminster is the seat of power. Guards exist. Clerks exist. The Tower of London controls gunpowder supplies. And yet 36 barrels end up under the House of Lords. If Cecil truly built the most effective listening network in Europe, how could he miss that? If he did not miss it, why wait? Those are the two jaws of the debate. The trap theory says Cecil sensed a plot early and let it ripen. Not because he wanted Parliament destroyed, he wanted the opposite, but because he wanted the public to see how close catastrophe came. Fear is a tool. A near miss makes people beg for harsher laws. It makes loyalty feel like safety. It makes a minority faith look like an internal enemy. The counter-argument is simpler. Conspiracy is messy. Powder could be bought through intermediaries. Storage could be explained as winter fuel. Officials could be lazy, and Cecil might have heard whispers without knowing where the barrels were until Monteagle's warning forced a focused search. Either way, notice what remains true. The plot depends on the state being blind, and the state depends on looking everywhere. That contest, secrecy versus surveillance, is the real battlefield. So as Fawkes turns barrels in damp air to keep the powder usable, imagine Cecil's clerks turning letters over a candle to read what was meant to be private. Two men, two kinds of control. One city holding its breath. And the closer the barrels get to the final day, the more the smallest human weakness matters. A nervous recruit, a guilty conscience, a careless sentence spoken to the wrong ear. In a world of spies and fear, the plot does not need a cannon to fail. It needs only one leak. The next step is where nerves betray faith. October 1605 arrives, and the plot begins to bleed from the inside, not because a spy is caught in the cellar, but because someone's conscience flinches at a specific name on the guest list. 10 days before the opening of Parliament, an anonymous letter is delivered to Lord Monteagle, a prominent Catholic peer. A servant brings it during dinner. It was handed to a footman in the street by a tall man whose face stayed hidden in shadow. The handwriting looks disguised. The message is clear enough to raise the hairs on the neck: do not attend Parliament. The letter warns that they shall receive a terrible blow in this Parliament, and that they shall not see who hurts them. It does not name gunpowder. It does not say House of Lords, but it paints a threat in thick strokes. Monteagle does not burn it. He does not hide it. He rides straight to Whitehall and hands it to Robert Cecil. This is the hinge. A conspiracy can survive silence. It rarely survives paper. Word of the letter reaches Catesby's circle quickly. Panic spreads through the inner group because the implication is obvious. Someone talked. Eyes turn to Francis Tresham, a late recruit pulled in for money rather than steal. Tresham is Monteagle's brother-in-law. If any man would try to save a relative while letting the rest of Parliament burn, it would be him. Catesby and Wintour confront Tresham in London. Threats fly. Tresham swears innocence with such intensity that Catesby hesitates, and that hesitation becomes fatal. The group convinces itself the letter is too vague to matter. They tell themselves the government will dismiss it as a crank warning. So the plan continues. But Catesby wants reassurance. He sends Fawkes back to the cellar to check the barrels and the markers he has placed, small signs to show if anything has been disturbed. Fawkes enters the dark, checks the stack, smells damp stone, and reports back nothing has moved. The secret is safe. He is wrong in the most dangerous way a professional can be wrong. The government does not need to touch the barrels yet. It only needs to know where they are. Cecil begins moving pieces quietly, waiting for the moment that will catch conspirators red-handed. And while the plotters argue about loyalty, the state does what it always does best. It prepares procedure. Now the clock starts sounding louder. On the afternoon of November 4th, the day before the opening, Fawkes is in the cellar making final preparations. He has a lantern. He has slow matches. He has a watch to time the fuse. He is ready to become the hand that pulls the kingdom's heart out. Then he hears voices outside. The door opens, and to Fawkes' surprise, It is not a swarm of soldiers. It is an inspection. The Lord Chamberlain, the Earl of Suffolk, walks in with officials, and with him is Lord Monteagle, the man who delivered the warning letter. It feels casual, almost polite, like a bureaucratic box being ticked before the king arrives. Fawkes holds his ground. He wears cloak and boots like a servant who belongs in storage spaces. He calls himself John Johnson, servant of Thomas Percy. Suffolk looks around the damp room. He sees a massive pile of firewood and coal. He sees a rough-looking man standing guard. He asks a simple question that could kill the plot in a second. To whom does this wood belong, to my master? Thomas Percy, Fawkes replies. His voice does not shake. Suffolk notes that Percy seems well stocked for winter and leaves. The door closes. The voices fade. Fawkes believes he just performed the greatest bluff in history. He slips out to find Percy and Wintour and tells them what happened. They urge him to flee. The government is sniffing. If they inspected once, they can return with soldiers. But Fawkes refuses. His soldier's duty has turned into stubbornness. He returns to the cellar again, determined to light the fuse the moment he hears boots, blowing himself up with the regime if necessary. He sits in darkness with touchwood and slow match in his pocket, listening to London bells and distant footsteps, counting time like a metronome. And here is the bitter truth. The inspection was not an accident. It was a look, a measure, a confirmation. Cecil now has enough to act without looking foolish, and he can time the strike to maximize the public horror. At shortly after midnight, the date flips to November 5th. Outside, in the alleys of Westminster, armed men move quietly toward the door. Remember, secrecy survives only until it meets routine. Just after midnight, on November 5th, the cellar door bursts open, and the darkness fills with armed men. This time it is not Suffolk's gentle inspection. It is Sir Thomas Conyvet, a magistrate, leading a squad with authority and steel. Fawkes is still in cloak and spurs. He barely has time to reach for anything before Hans sees him near the doorway. He fights strong, trained, a veteran soldier, but numbers are a weapon too. They wrestle him down and bind his wrists with his own garters. When they search him, the evidence is damning a watch for timing, slow matches, touchwood, tools of ignition, tools of intent. Then they tear through the camouflage. Behind the firewood, they find the barrels, 36 of them. The cellar is suddenly not a storage room, but a sentence hanging under Parliament. Fawkes does not beg. He does not panic. Witnesses describe his eyes as burning with Roman resolution, a phrase that will follow him into legend. When asked if he regrets his actions, he reportedly answers with cold honesty his only regret is that he failed to blow them all up, including himself. Right then, he is dragged through the streets, under guard, to Whitehall, straight to the king's presence. Imagine the scene, the middle of the night. King James hauled from sleep, sitting in a nightshirt, surrounded by frightened courtiers. The air is thick with panic, and in the center stands a dirty man calling himself John Johnson, refusing to look small. The interrogation becomes one of the most striking dialogues in British history. Most prisoners tremble. Fawkes is insolent, Asked why he would kill the king, he sneers that desperate diseases require dangerous remedies. Asked why he has so much powder, he delivers a savage line to the king's face to blow him back to his Scottish mountains. He refuses to name accomplices. He claims sole credit. He denies priestly involvement. He is buying time for Catesby and the others to flee and ignite an uprising. James is shaken and strangely impressed. He calls Fawkes's posture Roman. He recognizes soldierly loyalty even as he wants the man destroyed. But admiration is useless against a state that needs names. Words will not break this prisoner. So James reaches for a quill and writes a warrant to the Tower of London. Its language is bureaucratic and chilling, begin with gentler tortures, then proceed by degrees to the worst. Stay with the thread. It tightens fast. Fawkes is taken by boat to the Tower of London, entering through the Traitor's Gate where water laps against stone like quiet applause. Behind him, the city breathes relief. Ahead, the fortress waits with tools older than gunpowder and just as effective. The tower is a universe of pain disguised as administration. He is handed over to officials like Sir William Waad, a hardened bureaucrat with a hatred of Catholics and a taste for control. Thanks to the king's warrant, Waad has permission to solve the problem using engineered suffering. For the first days, they apply the so-called gentler tortures. Manacles, suspension by wrists, hours of hanging with feet barely touching the floor. This forces the chest to expand until each breath becomes labor. Shoulders slowly dislocate under the body's own weight. It is slow, clinical damage. Fawkes holds out. He admits he is Catholic. He admits he meant to blow up Parliament, but he refuses to name a single co-conspirator. He is buying time. Every hour of silence is an hour of head start for the men riding north. Silence has a price. On November 7th, patience ends. Orders arrive, proceed to the worst. The rack is a simple machine with a hideous purpose. A rectangular frame raised off the ground, rollers at each end, ropes tied to ankles and wrists. As the handles turn, tension increases by ratchet clicks. Muscles stretch, ligaments strain, joints give way. Hips dislocate, shoulders tear, vertebrae separate. The body is dismantled without breaking the skin. We know what it did to him because history preserved two signatures. Before torture, Guido is bold, confident. After the rack, the signature becomes a faint, jagged scrawl, barely a name. He can't hold a quill. His arms are ruined. The man who called himself Guido collapses back into Guy Fawkes, identity shattered along with body. He breaks, not because he becomes cowardly, but because biology wins. Pain overrides will. Names spell out Catesby, Wintour, the rest. And here is the tragedy: his confession is unnecessary. The state is already moving. While Fawkes screams in stone corridors, government forces are riding toward the Midlands where the other conspirators have gathered for a doomed uprising. One letter can outweigh 1,000 oaths. Catesby and the remaining conspirators flee London hard, riding for 3 days through rain and cold, hoping to ignite a Catholic uprising in the Midlands. They believe that once Parliament explodes, Catholics will rise like a wave. It is a fantasy built from desperation. Reality greets them with locked doors. Villages do not rally. Towns do not cheer. Even sympathetic families keep shutters closed, terrified of the king's revenge. The silence is the worst wound. It tells Catesby that his imagined revolution never existed outside his own circle. By November 7th, they reach Hobeche House in Staffordshire, exhausted, soaked, cornered. The sheriff's men are close behind with armed force. The conspirators have brought their own powder for a last stand, but the weather has soaked it during river crossings. In a moment of exhausted stupidity, they spread the damp powder on trays before an open fire to dry. You can guess what happens. An ember jumps, a sudden flash. Fire erupts through the room. Men scream. Faces blister. The weapon turns on its owners. The irony is savage. The powder meant to destroy Parliament maims the men who carried it. Catesby's face is scorched. He reads the moment as judgment. They all know the truth. There will be no escape, only the choice of how to die. On the morning of November 8th, the sheriff's men surround the house. They do not even fully realize they are cornering the architects of the Gunpowder Plot. They think they are chasing thieves and rebels. Inside, Catesby, Thomas Percy, and the Wright brothers prepare for a soldier's death. They don't barricade the doors. They open them. They walk into the courtyard with swords drawn, crucifixes kissed, refusing to be dragged to a scaffold like Fawkes. The firefight is brief and brutal. Musket balls cut men down fast. Then comes the moment that feels like dark comedy written by fate. One shot passes through Thomas Percy and strikes Robert Catesby. One bullet. 2 leaders. Both fall. Catesby crawls back inside, clutching a religious image, and dies moments later. The mastermind escapes the rack, the trial, the humiliation. But the state will not let him rest. His body is exhumed. His head is cut off and displayed on a pike set where he can watch the Parliament he failed to destroy. The danger is not only fire, it is timing. With the plot crushed, England does not soften. It hardens. The immediate relief around the king turns into celebration. And celebration is quickly shaped into tradition. Fear needs an outlet, and governments know how to aim crowds. In the aftermath, the Gunpowder Plot achieves the opposite of what Catesby dreamed. Instead of liberating Catholics, it condemns them to deeper suspicion for generations. New restrictions tighten. Catholics are barred from roles of trust. They are pushed from law, office, and influence. The state now has the perfect justification. Look what they tried to do. A failed blast becomes a successful excuse. And yet the most fascinating twist is cultural. Every year on November 5th, Britain lights up. Bonfires burn. Fireworks mimic an explosion that never happened. Effigies are thrown onto flames. Originally, this is not a family festival. It is state-mandated Thanksgiving, a ritual designed to reinforce loyalty to the crown and hostility to Catholic treason. People burn effigies of the Pope as well as the plotters. The venom is open. Over centuries, the venom fades and the ritual survives. What was once a political warning becomes a community night of sparks and warm drinks. The guy becomes a straw figure in old clothes, more scarecrow than traitor. Then the 20th century rewrites the symbol again, a graphic novel, then films. Turn Fawkes' face into a mask of rebellion. The hacker group Anonymous adopts it. Protesters from one end of the world to the other wear the stylized grin, treating it as a universal sign of resistance to power. This is the supreme irony. Guy Fawkes was not a Democrat. He was not campaigning for modern liberty. He was a religious militant, tied to hopes of a Spanish-backed Catholic restoration. If the plot succeeded, England might have traded one form of oppression for another under a different banner. So why do people love the mask? Because humans are drawn to the image of a lone figure saying no to the state. We forget motive and remember resolve. We forget intended mass murder and remember the man who refused to break until his body was forced to. The mask becomes a mirror. When people look at it, they see their own anger at corruption, surveillance, and authority. They project modern meaning onto a dead man from 1605. From here, every hour becomes a weapon. Return, finally, to the scaffold in 1606. The public sees a villain. The state sees a lesson. But the man on the ladder is something more complicated, a soldier who became a tool who refused to give the king the ending he wanted. That last leap neck snapping instead of slow dismemberment was not nobility. It was control seized in the only second he still owned. The crown staged a ritual of fear. Fawkes turned it into a shorter story. The crowd wanted screams. He gave them silence. And that is the thread running through the whole plot. Control versus control. Catesby tried to control history with one violent stroke. Cecil tried to control the realm through surveillance and procedure. Fawkes tried to control the chemistry and the timing. In the end, the state's tools, spies, warrants, prisons, engineered pain, proved stronger than rebel discipline. But the rebels still won one strange victory. They lodged themselves in England's memory forever. Not as saints, not as heroes, but as a permanent reminder that power can be attacked from below, from shadows, from cellars. There is also a warning here about surveillance. Cecil's web of opened letters and paid listeners looks modern. So does the debate about whether he let a plot grow to justify repression, whether he knew specifics or only sensed danger. The result was the same. The state used the event to tighten laws and expand control. History is not a fairy tale of good kings and bad rebels. It is often a tragedy of perspective, where fear produces violence and violence produces more fear. The Gunpowder Plot is a perfect loop of that pattern. So here is my question for you in today's world. When you see the Guy Fawkes mask, do you think freedom or terror? And do you think the meaning of a symbol belongs to the person who created it, or to the crowds who adopt it later? If this deep dive changed how you see the story, hit like figuratively, and subscribe for more documentaries that strip myths down to their working parts. This is Maproom Battles. Ring the bell, leave your comment, and I'll be reading the debate down below. Because beneath every grand building, there is always a floorboard. And beneath some floorboards, there is a fuse waiting for the next hand. That is the hinge. Everything swings on it.